November 23rd, 1906, 15 hours. Rechlin Test Center, Central Germany. Coordinates 553 Z. Alman Hans Vera Lurcher walked across the frozen tarmac toward the aircraft that was supposed to save the Luftwaffe. The FW-1190 D-9, the Dora, sat waiting in the pre-dawn darkness, its long nose and annular radiator giving it an aggressive, purposeful look. Behind him, mechanics had prepared intelligence files on the captured P-51D Mustang. Performance data extracted from 3 weeks of analysis. Lurch had exactly 60 minutes of fuel. 60 minutes to answer the question that kept every German fighter pilot awake at night. Could Germany's newest fighter defeat the American escort that was destroying the Luftwaffe? He didn't know that what he was about to discover would reveal not just a performance gap, but the industrial reality that had already decided the war. By late 1904, the air war over Europe had reached a critical turning point. American strategic bombing campaigns were systematically destroying German industrial capacity. But the bombers weren't the primary threat. It was their escorts. The P-51 Mustang had changed everything. With drop tanks, it could accompany bombers all the way to Berlin and back. A 200-meter round trip. No German fighter could match that range. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin Viv 1650-7 engine gave it exceptional performance at high altitude, exactly where the bombers operated, and the Americans were producing them at a rate the Luftwaffe couldn't comprehend. The FW-190A series, powered by the BMW 801 radial engine, had been the Luftwaffe's frontline fighter since 1941. It was an excellent aircraft, beloved by pilots for its stability, firepower, and robust construction. But by 1944, it had a fatal limitation. The BM-801's performance degraded rapidly above 6,000 pound-mile. At 20,000 feet, it was gasping. The P-51 operated comfortably at 8,000 km/h, 26,000 feet, where the air was thin and cold. German pilots found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't reach. Statistics told the story with brutal clarity. In October 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 40 heavy bombers to fighter attack, but the Luftwaffe lost 483 fighters, a 12-1 kill ratio. It wasn't skill. German pilots were among the most experienced in the world. It wasn't courage. They were flying into formations of 1,000 bombers and hundreds of escorts. It was performance. The P-51 could choose when to fight, where to fight, whether to fight at all. German fighters couldn't. The FW-190D was Germany's response. Development had begun in late 1942, but production delays, bombing raids on factories, and resource shortages meant the first operational units didn't receive aircraft until September 1944, 2 years too late. Instead of the BMW 801 radial engine, it used the Junkers Jumo 213A inline engine, a liquid-cooled power plant producing 1,050 horsepower with MW50 methanol water injection. The longer nose housed the new engine and an annular radiator. The tail was lengthened for balance. The result was an aircraft specifically designed to fight at altitude, to intercept American bomber formations, to defeat the P-51 Mustang. On paper, its specifications looked competitive. Maximum speed 426 pa at 21,000 feet, faster than the FW-190A8 by nearly 40 mph, and matching the P-51D's published top speed of 437 mph service ceiling, 39,000 feet, high enough to engage any bomber formation. Climb rate 300 feet per minute at sea level. Excellent for an interceptor. Armament. 213mm Ju-131 machine guns in the cowling, and 220mm MG-151 at 20 cannons in the wing routes. Devastating firepower, but paper specifications didn't account for operational reality. The Jumo 213 engine, while powerful, was complex. The MW50 injection system, which boosted power for short periods, required careful management. Engine overheating was common. Maintenance was difficult, and most critically, the aircraft's handling characteristics against the P-51 were unknown. Hans Vera Lurcher understood this context better than most. At 30 years old, he was already one of Germany's most experienced test pilots. Since 1942, he had been assigned to Erbengele Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary testing facility. His job was to evaluate every aircraft that came into German hands, captured, borrowed, or stolen. He had flown over 60 different types. British Spitfires and Typhoons, American P-51D Thunderbolts, and P-8 Lightnings, even an F4U Corsair 3 months earlier. His reports were precise, technical, and brutally honest. He had tested a captured P-51D Mustang in February 1944, an aircraft from the 3/4 Fighter Group that had force-landed near Hanover. That report had been classified immediately. The data was too devastating. The Mustang's range exceeded 1,600 miles with drop tanks. Its speed at altitude was 47 miles. Its climb rate to 20,000 feet was under 7 minutes. And most importantly, its roll rate at high speed was exceptional, allowing pilots to reverse direction faster than any German fighter could follow. Lurch had written in his conclusion, the P-51D represents a fundamental challenge to Luftwaffe operations. Its combination of range, speed, and altitude performance cannot be matched by current German fighters. Tactical doctrine must adapt, or losses will become unsustainable. 9 months later, losses had indeed become unsustainable. The Luftwaffe was losing not just aircraft, but experienced pilots faster than training schools could replace them. Rechlin Test Center sat on the shores of Lake Müritz in Mecklenburg. It was Germany's equivalent to Wright Field in Ohio, a sprawling complex of hangars, workshops, and testing facilities. By November 1944, Allied bombing had damaged much of the infrastructure, but the runways remained operational. The facilities had tested every significant German aircraft design since in 1933, and Lurch had been instrumental in evaluating captured Allied types. The night before the test, Lurch reviewed intelligence files on the P-51D. It was the latest Mustang variant, with several improvements over the B model he'd flown in February. The canopy was bubble style, providing 360 visibility. The ammunition load had increased to 1,080 rounds of .50 caliber for the 6 wing-mounted machine guns. Minor aerodynamic refinements had improved top speed by 3 to 4 mph. Most importantly, American production was staggering. North American Aviation's Inglewood, California plant was producing 16 Mustangs per day. The new Dallas, Texas plant added another 10 daily, over 400 aircraft per month. Germany's entire F-190 production, including all variants, was perhaps 150 aircraft monthly, and that number was falling as Allied bombing intensified. Lurch's test plan was methodical. He would evaluate the FWW-90D's performance across its entire envelope, then compare each metric against P-51D data speed tests at various altitudes, climb rate measurements, dive characteristics, turn performance, energy retention in vertical maneuvers, gun platform stability. The test would take 60 minutes, limited by fuel capacity. Every minute had to count. He understood the stakes. The FW-90D represented Germany's last chance at producing a competitive high-altitude fighter. The Mi-262 jet was revolutionary, but plagued by engine reliability issues and fuel shortages. The TR-2 was still in development. If the Dora couldn't match the Mustang, the Luftwaffe had no answer. At 0600 hours, he began his pre-flight walkout. The Dora's long nose was immediately striking compared to the radial-engined FW-190A. The nose stretched nearly 2 meters ahead of the cockpit, housing the Jumo 213A engine and its cooling system. The annular radiator mounted behind the propeller gave the nose a distinctive appearance. The vertical stabilizer was taller, necessary to compensate for the longer fuselage. At 6:15 hours, Lurch climbed into the cockpit. The ground crew had already completed their checks. Fuel 524L, enough for approximately 65 minutes of flight at normal power settings. MDOW-50 tank, 115L, good for 10 minutes of emergency boost power. Ammunition loaded, all systems green. He strapped in and began his cockpit checks. The instrument panel was familiar, nearly identical to the FW-190A, except for additional gauges monitoring the liquid-cooled engine, oil temperature, coolant temperature, M50 pressure. The control stick felt standard, rudder pedals responsive. He adjusted his oxygen mask, checked his stopwatch 68 hours. He signaled the ground crew. The Jumo 213A roared to life with a deep, powerful rumble, distinctly different from the rough bark of the BMW 801 Radial. The engine settled into a smooth idle at 1200 RPM. Lurch, check temperatures. Oil 50°C. Coolant 5°C within normal parameters. He advanced the throttle slightly. Testing response clean immediate. The door shook gently as power increased. He taxied to runway 27, weaving slightly to see past the long nose. The visibility on the ground was poor, worse than the radio-engineered variants he'd been warned about this. Several pilots had reported ground loop incidents during takeoff because they couldn't see the runway center line. At the threshold, he ran through final checks. Flap set to takeoff position 20 to go. Propeller pitch fully fine. Supercharger automatic trim neutral. He glanced at his knee board where he'd written the P-51D's performance benchmarks. Time to 20,000 feet. 6 minutes 48 seconds. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet. 47 miles. Those were the numbers he had to beat or match. 6:22 hours. He pushed the throttle forward. Looks to 2-minute though. Take off. The acceleration was impressive. The Dora surged forward, tail lifting almost immediately. At 110 umpire indicated. Lurch pulled back gently on the stick. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, much cleaner than the F-1. He retracted the landing gear and flaps, noting the time. The climb began 0625, minute 3, initial climb assessment. Lurch established a climb at 175 miles, indicated optimal for the Jumo 213. The rate of climb indicator showed 3,200 feet per minute at sea level. Excellent. He cross-checked against his notes. The P-51D achieved 345 feet per minute at the same conditions. The Mustang had an advantage, but it was marginal. He leveled at 3,000 meters, approximately 10,000 feet, and ran basic handling checks, banking left and right at various speeds. The ailerons were crisp and responsive, better than the FW190A roll rate felt excellent. He executed several quick reversals. The Dora snapped from bank to bank cleanly. 0630-minute 8-speed test at 10,000 feet. He pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power and waited for the speed to stabilize. The airspeed indicator climbed steadily, 360 mph, 360 mph, 400 mph. It settled at 411 mph, indicated at 10,400. He checked his notes. The P-51D achieved 395 mph at the same altitude. At low altitude, the Dora was faster by 16 mph, a genuine advantage. But Lurch knew this didn't matter. Combat over Germany happened at 20,000 to 30,000 feet where the bombers flew. He needed altitude performance data. Post 3, minute 11, climb to combat altitude. He pulled the nose up and established a maximum continuous climb. The Jumo 213A roared as he climbed through 15 offset. Temperatures remained stable: oil, 85 degrees C. Coolant, 95 degrees C. Good. At 18,000 feet, he engaged the MV injection system. The power boost was immediate and dramatic. The climb rate increased noticeably. He passed 20,000 feet at 69, exactly 17 minutes after takeoff. He checked his notes. The P-51D reached 20,000 feet in 6 minutes 8 seconds. The Dora had taken more than twice as long. The realization hit him immediately. This wasn't a fair comparison. He'd been running speed tests at lower altitude. But even accounting for that, the climb performance gap was significant. 6:42 minute 20 high altitude speed test. Lurch leveled at 25,000 feet and pushed the throttle forward. This was the critical test. At this altitude, the P-51D's Merlin engine with its 2-stage supercharger should have a significant advantage over the Jumo 213A single-stage unit. The speed built slowly in the thin air, 380 mph, 390 mph, 400 mph. The airspeed indicator seemed to freeze at 48 mph. He waited, but it wouldn't climb higher. He activated MV injection again. The needle moved. 415 mph, 421 mph, 426 mph maximum speed. With MW50, he could match or slightly exceed the Dora's published top speed, but MW50 could only run for 10 minutes before the tank emptied. The P-51D's 47 mph was its continuous maximum. The Mustang was 11 mph faster at combat altitude, and it could maintain that speed indefinitely. 6:48 minute 26 energy retention test, the test that mattered most. Lurcher climbed to 28,000 feet, then rolled inverted and pulled into a steep dive. The Dora accelerated rapidly, 450 mph, 480 mph, 500 mph. The controls became heavy, but remained responsive. At 20,000 feet, he pulled back hard into a maximum performance zoom climb. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. His vision tunneled slightly. The Dora groaned, but held together. He watched the altimeter spin upward. 22,000 feet, 24,000. 26,040. The aircraft finally stalled at 31,500 feet. He'd gained 11,500 feet on momentum alone. He checked his notes. In his February test of the P-51B from the same parameters, the Mustang had zoomed to 34,200 feet, nearly 3,000 feet higher. The energy retention difference was substantial. 0655 minute 30 combat simulation. Boom and zoom. Lurch set up a simulated attack profile. Dive from 28,000 feet to 20,000 feet. Simulate a firing pass on a bomber, then execute maximum performance climb back to 28,000. 28,000 feet. This was the standard intercept tactic. He started his stopwatch. The dive was clean. The Dora accelerated to pass 500 mph easily. At 20,000 feet, he pulled out hard, simulated a 3-second gun pass, then immediately transitioned to full power climb. The Jumo 213A roared. MW-50D. The aircraft clawed for altitude. At 24,000 feet, 1 minute into the climb, the MW-50 ran dry. The power dropped noticeably. The climb rate decreased from 2,800 feet per minute to 1,600 feet per minute. He continued climbing, watching his stopwatch. At 28,000 feet, he checked the time. 4 minutes 20 seconds to regain altitude. He ran the numbers in his head. Based on P-51D performance data, the Mustang would complete the same profile in approximately 3 minutes 15 seconds, over a minute faster. In combat, that minute was the difference between setting up another attack or becoming the target. Down 2 minute 40. The tactical paradox. Lurch understood the implications immediately. If he was flying this FWD and encountered a P-51D formation, what were his options? Option 1. Attack from above, dive on the escorts, attempt to separate one from the formation. But the Mustang's superior energy retention meant it could zoom, climb away, and regain altitude faster. The German pilot would be forced to break off or risk becoming the pursued instead of the pursuer. Option 2. Attack at co-altitude. Try to engage in turning combat. But the P-51D's exceptional roll rate at high speed meant it could reverse direction faster than the Dora could follow. And if the Mustang pilot chose to disengage, he could simply push his throttle forward and accelerate away. The Dora couldn't catch him. Option 3. Attack from below, climb up toward the formation, but the climb rate disadvantage meant the Mustangs would see him coming with plenty of time to position for a counterattack. And climbing through 25,000 feet, the Dora was vulnerable, slow, and losing performance. Either way, the German pilot lost. The P-51 could dictate the terms of engagement. Fight only when advantageous. Disengage at will. The FW-190D, despite being Germany's best high-altitude piston fighter, simply didn't have the performance margin to force combat on a competent Mustang pilot. 0710. Minute 48. Testing weaknesses. Lurch spent the remaining fuel testing edge cases turn performance at various speeds. The Dora turned well, better than the FW-190A, but the P-51D's lower wing loading gave it a tighter turn radius. Stall characteristics were docile. No surprises? Visibility was excellent with the standard canopy. Gun platform stability was good. The heavy airframe absorbed recoil well. He tested one final scenario, defensive tactics. If bounced from above by Mustangs, what were his options? He rolled into a hard brake turn maximum G. The Dora responded cleanly, but he knew from intelligence reports that the P-51's roll rate would allow it to follow through the turn and maintain a firing position. The only real defense was to dive away, use the Dora's excellent dive performance to separate, then use ground clutter to escape. It wasn't a tactic. It was survival. 72 minute 60. Return to base. Fuel was low. Lurch throttled back and began his descent toward Rechlin. As he flew the approach, weaving to see past the long nose, he mentally composed his report. The conclusions were clear, and they were devastating. Lurch landed at 7:23 hours, exactly 61 minutes after takeoff. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft, checking for any issues. There were none. The Dora had performed flawlessly. That was part of the problem. The aircraft had no hidden capabilities, no surprises that would change the assessment. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a very good fighter that was simply outperformed by its American equivalent. He walked directly to the technical office and began writing. The report took 5 hours, 12 pages of detailed analysis, performance charts, tactical recommendations. The opening summary was blunt. The FW-190 D-9 represents the peak of German piston engine fighter development. It is fast, well-armed, and handles superbly. But against the P-51D Mustang, it is inadequate. He detailed the performance gaps. Speed at 25,000 feet. P-51D faster by 11 miles per hour continuous versus F-90 requiring empty-to-vafty boost for limited duration. Climb to combat altitude P-51 Dora % faster. Energy retention. P-51D superior by approximately 25. Range. P-51D 1,600 mi with drop tanks versus F-190D 420 mi internal fuel. But the most damaging section was the tactical analysis. Lurch wrote, "The fundamental problem is not performance margins. It is operational flexibility. The P-51D pilot can choose when and where to fight. The FW-190D pilot cannot. This asymmetry is decisive," he continued. German tactical doctrine emphasizes aggressive attack, tight formations, and close-range gunnery. These tactics assume rough performance par against an opponent with superior speed, climb rate, and energy retention. These tactics are suicidal. The enemy can engage on his terms and disengage at will. The German pilot is forced to either accept disadvantageous combat or abandon the intercept entirely. Then came the conclusion that would cause the most controversy. The performance gap cannot be closed through pilot skill or tactical innovation. The P-51D's advantages are systemic. They derive from superior engine performance, better aerodynamics, and most critically unrestricted development and testing time. German fighters are constrained by resource shortages, bombing-induced production delays, and compressed development cycles. The result is predictable. He added a final paragraph. Production numbers compound the tactical disadvantage. Intelligence estimates suggest American P-51 production exceeds 400 aircraft monthly. German FW-190 production of all types is approximately 150 monthly and declining. Even if performance were equal, which it is not, the numerical disparity makes sustained operations impossible. For every German fighter lost, the Americans replaced 10. Lurcher submitted his report through channels on November 24th. It went first to the technical office at Rechlin, then to the Reich Luftwaffe Ministerium in Berlin, and eventually to the General Flieger, Adolf Galland himself. The response was swift and predictable. 2 weeks later, Lurch was summoned to Berlin. The meeting took place in a borrowed office, the ministry's main building, having been damaged in a recent bombing raid. A colonel, whose name Lurch never learned, questioned every conclusion. Your assessment assumes American pilots of equal skill. German pilots have far more combat experience. Lurcher responded carefully. The performance gaps I documented are objective measured data. Pilot skill cannot overcome a 40% climb rate disadvantage or 11 mph speed deficit at altitude. In energy fighting, which is how the Mustang is flown, these margins are decisive. What about the M50 system? You noted it provides adequate boost power for 10 minutes. Then the Dora reverts to standard performance, which is inferior. The P-51 maintains its performance continuously. Your tactical recommendations suggest defensive posture that contradicts Luftwaffe doctrine. Luftwaffe doctrine was developed when German fighters had performance advantages or par. That situation no longer exists. The colonel stared at him for a long moment. Then your technical observations are noted. However, your tactical conclusions are premature and undermine morale. This report will be classified top secret and distributed on a strictly limited basis. You will not discuss these findings with operational units. Lurch understood the report was being buried, not because it was wrong, but because it was too honest. Admitting that Germany's newest fighter was outperformed would acknowledge a truth the Luftwaffe High Command couldn't accept. They were losing the technological war. But reports have a way of spreading. Within weeks, copies of Lurch's assessment were circulating among fighter units. Through unofficial channels, pilots shared information that official command wouldn't provide. By January 1945, FW-90D pilots knew what they were facing. The knowledge didn't help. They still had to fly the missions. The combat record validated Lurch's analysis. From December 1944 through March 1945, FW-90D equipped units claimed approximately 180 aerial victories against all Allied types, but they lost over 320 aircraft in the same period, a kill-loss ratio of roughly 1:1. Against P-51 Mustangs specifically, the ratio was worse, estimated at 1:2. The problem wasn't the F-21D. It was an excellent aircraft. The problem was that excellent wasn't enough when the enemy had superior produced in overwhelming numbers with unrestricted fuel supplies and replacement pilots. Hans Vera Lurcher survived the war. In April 1995, as Soviet forces approached Rechlin, he flew west and surrendered to American forces. His expertise was immediately recognized. The U.S. Army Air Forces recruited him to evaluate captured German aircraft, the reverse of his wartime role. After the war, Lurcher wrote extensively about his experiences. His memoir, Luftwaffe, a test pilot, published in 1956, included detailed accounts of testing Allied aircraft, including both the P-51 Mustang and the F-90D. The book became a primary source for aviation historians studying comparative aircraft performance. In interviews decades later, Lurch was remarkably candid. When asked about the F-90D versus P-51 comparison, he said the Dora was the best piston fighter Germany produced, but best is relative. Against the Mustang, it was simply outclassed. Not by a huge margin in any single metric, but across every metric that mattered. Speed, climb, range, energy retention. The cumulative effect was decisive, he added. The real problem wasn't engineering. German engineers were excellent. The problem was resources and time. The F-190D entered service 2 years too late. By then, the Americans had refined the Mustang through multiple variants, solved its problems, optimized production. We were trying to catch up to a moving target while our factories were being bombed. Modern analysis confirms Lurch's assessment. The P-51D Mustang achieved what few aircraft in history have: a combination of performance, reliability, range, and producibility that made it the decisive fighter of the European air war. Total P-51 production exceeded 1,000 aircraft. F-90D production was approximately 700 aircraft. The lesson transcended aviation. Lurch's report documented something broader than fighter performance. It documented the industrial reality of World War II. Germany could produce quality. The F-190D proved that. But America could produce quality at scale. The P-51 proved that. And in industrial warfare, scale matters more than individual excellence. Lurcher's 60-minute test flight on November 23, 1944, revealed a truth that German command couldn't accept. The war was already lost, not on the battlefields of France or Russia, but in the factories of Detroit and Englewood. The F-190D was an excellent aircraft. But excellence wasn't enough when the enemy had superiority, produced at rates that made losses irrelevant. One test pilot, 60 minutes of flight time, 12 pages of honest assessment. The truth was documented, and the truth was ignored. By the time German command acknowledged reality, it was far too late. Hans Vera died in 1997 at age 80. His legacy is the honest assessment of over 60 aircraft types, including some of the most advanced fighters of World War II. He flew the F-190D once for 60 minutes in November 1944. It was enough to understand that individual skill and courage couldn't overcome industrial capacity. That lesson remains relevant if you enjoyed this video and want to see more stories from World War II. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more forgotten battles, hidden histories, and untold soldier stories to life. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. What event or perspective would you like to see next? I read every comment.